Hey everyone, I know we are literally a couple hours away from the new DLC launching, but I really wanted to make this video because it's like a pre-Edge of Fate comparison video, like a reference point, and a lot of people were asking me to make this video. Originally, I had planned to make a bunch of videos before the Edge of Fate. You might have noticed that my channel is a little inactive right now, given that a new DLC is coming out. But I've been speedrunning literally from the moment I open my eyes to the moment I close my eyes for the last week or so. So I've had literally no personal time to make any videos whatsoever. This video was supposed to be made 5 or 6 days ago. I had scripted it completely, or not scripted it, but I had outlined it completely. I made these nice slides. I prepped a bunch of stuff, and I have literally not had a moment to breathe for like the last week. Because speedrunning teams, they love kind of milking as much time as they can right at the end of the season because they know when the season drops, they're probably going to stop running because of day one and stuff like that. So, yeah, this video is just going to be a comparison of all of the day one damage strategies that people might find to be relevant or interesting. We're going to go over them using a data-driven approach as usual, and then I will discuss what I will recommend as a default option going into the Edge of Fate. And, when the Edge of Fate actually drops, I will, of course, redo all of this damage testing and probably present my findings and see if Bungie has kind of stealth patched anything, or maybe weapons in general will do less damage because you have to compensate for some of the other overtuned damage stuff that's going to be introduced next patch. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with our pre-Edge of Fate Day 1 DPS review. So a brief outline here, and you can see here July 10th is when I finalized this presentation and was going to record the video, but again, really busy. So sorry about that. I was going to make like a shopping list video and a couple other things as well that people were asking me to make. I literally had a presentation actually lined up for another video. I just don't have time, and there's no point now because servers are down, right? No point of like a pre-Edge of Fate shopping list. Like, oh, you better get like Perfect Paradox because, the game is now down. So anyways, there's going to be 6 sections in this video. The first section is going to be my methodology, explaining the goal of this whole thing and the process that I used in order to obtain my data. And then the last 5 sections are the 5 major categories of damage dealing strategies in Destiny 2. And we'll talk about, I think they kind of umbrella cover every single possible day one boss type that you might encounter in a contest scenario. So that's kind of why I have them split up like that. Okay. So let's start with my methodology. So how is this data collected? How can this testing data be reproduced? And how is it relevant for contest rating compared to my normal content? So the goal of this entire project was to simulate realistic, minimal effort day one circumstances for all of the relevant damage options in the game. I have a sustain tab, I have a swap tab, I have a rotation ranking, but all of these things assume very optimized conditions. Reload exotics like Rain of Fire, damage exotics like Sanguine Alchemy, perfect execution, stuff like that, right? So I wanted to avoid all that and just really reduce all the damage options in the game down to their bare bones, okay? So the process was I recorded every strategy, every damage strategy I could think of that might be relevant for day one with pretty good execution, but with some realism. So for example, swords, I tested on Herald, and with swords, you get stomped sometimes. I didn't cut out the stomp time. I included it as part of just doing damage to a boss with a sword, which I think most sword bosses in this game do stomp you. And for weapons where, you could miss a crit, for example, Lord of Wolves, you could definitely feasibly miss a crit. I guess if you have a div, it's less likely, but, just in case maybe the div goes down for a little bit. I did my Lord of Wolves testing on Templar, and I missed a couple crits. I hit a couple bodies, right? So I didn't go for 100% perfection on all of these. Most of them are pretty close to perfect in terms of execution, but I don't think it's relatively difficult to match the level of execution I put into these rotations because all of them don't use any special rotation or anything like that, and they're all like manual reloads. So step 1 of this process that you can see on the left here is using A2TC, a 2016 Toyota Corolla's Destiny Damage Tracker tool, which you guys are probably familiar that I've used plenty of times before on this channel for damage testing. But basically what it does is it allows you to measure the health bar of a raid boss 16 times a second and output that to a CSV or like a spreadsheet like table file. And I can analyze that table file and turn it into a graph or manipulate it and put it into like a table for like a summary or something like that. So the reason why we measured the boss health bar is because it updates very quickly compared to other damage methods, and it's very precise, and it's the only way you can realistically plot damage over time Whereas other options, you can't really feasibly do that over a long span of time, many, many times a second. And the wipe screen is a little unreliable in some cases compared to the health bar. So health bar measuring is the way to go, and you'll see why I love it so much in the next slide. Now, the second thing that I did was I actually recorded 2 separate clips for every single damage rotation. The first one was the damage rotation itself, and the second one was a clip of me doing part of the damage rotation on Riven with a Stormscape Barricade in front of me. And that's because different weapon types result in having different bolt charge rates. And you can see in this third screenshot here, right over here, that you can see bolt charge rate, right? And it's different between different weapon types because some weapon types, they really dump their mags really quickly, like rockets, for example, their mag percentage. They go through that really, really quickly, so they have a very, very fast bolt charge rate. Other weapons, for example, like linears and snipers, they take a lot longer to burn through certain percentages of their mag, and so they have a lower bolt charge rate. And so I wanted to find the bolt charge rate for every single rotation, so I did that. I got a clip of it on Riven, and yeah, I calculated bolt charge separately because bolt charge is only affected by debuff. For those of you that are wondering in terms of like just regular data, I calculated the DPS, the raw DPS of the recordings with just surges and nothing else. And because bolt charge isn't affected by surges, I didn't want to complicate my math. So I actually did all the recordings without bolt charge and then added bolt charge in post using math. So that's kind of why I recorded bolt charge clips separately. All of these were with just one Stormscape Barricade and with no other like external assistance, like shooting an area denial in between or something like that. So reducing the complexity of math was my goal with that one, and I would say it succeeded. And I got some interesting data as well. If you guys look at the spreadsheet, which I'll link in the description, you can see how different weapons have different bolt charge rates. And I also included a percentage column that shows you how much bolt charge increases your weapon damage by. So a lot of these weapons, for example, even without flashover, the damage increase goes from anywhere between 7 to like 17%. So for those of you who are wondering, how much does bolt charge actually increase your DPS on day one? Everybody is going to get a buff by around 7 to 17%. Depends on the weapon type. The lower DPS your weapons do, the higher bolt charge is going to, bigger chunk of your damage it's going to account for. So for example, div users, bolt charge, I believe, increases their DPS by like 20, 25% or something like that, because div just does very low DPS in general, right? So the bolt charge is just going to be a bigger chunk of the pie. But for most actual damage options, it's going to be between 7 and 17%. The high percentage stuff is going to be weapons that have a very high bolt charge rate, for example, swords with wolf packs. And then finally, the third thing that I did was calculations, right? So the conditions that I simulated, or not simulated, the conditions that I guess applied to my testing were 1 loader mod, manual reloads, well of radiance, appropriate debuff. So for a crit weapon like Lord of Wolves or like linear, I chose div 1.15, or for other weapons like body weapons like Acreus or swords, I chose tractor 30%, 1.3. 1 Stormscape Barricade, and then importantly, no exotic assists, no exotic armor, anything like that, or anything you would deem special under a contest condition. So no Lumina, nothing like that, just bare bones, well, surges, debuff, 1 loader mod. That's it. Okay, so that's it for methodology. Before we get started with our first class of DPS options, I want to go ahead and show you why I love DDT so much. You can see here in this graph preview, all of this data comes from DDT. You can see every single damage option in the game and how it affects a boss health bar over time. So for example, this big straight orange line over here, this is Outbreak. Outbreak is a very like linear damage option. It's super straight, right? And then Agriceptor, all of these little bumps are from the freeze procs and the kind of freezing explosion sort of thing when you have Will Given Form active. Thunderlord, I've told people before, every time you stop shooting Thunderlord, you're going to get a big chunk at the health bar toward the end, right, as it updates. You got Grand Overture here, right? You got, what is this? This is Queen Breaker. So you can see all sorts of DPS options here. And down at the bottom, I believe this is Divinity. It's kind of hidden here, but it's like this dark blue line, right? So pretty cool stuff here. Just a direct visual representation of what the data looks like when you can record using Destiny Damage Tracker. Okay, next up, we're going to go ahead and talk about our first class of DPS options, which is melee options. So swords, shotguns, and glaives, close up, imprecise, and you should be willing to take a stomp or two. So not the type of weapon that you might use on a boss like Rolk, for example, on day one, because most people were not willing to take a stomp or two from Rolk on day one. So I've actually included 5 entries for almost every single class that we're going to go over here. And they're the 5 that are either the highest DPS or the most relevant, I think, for this specific damage class. Some of them I'm not even going to recommend. These aren't necessarily 5 recommendations. These are just like the 5 most prominent options. And I'll discuss potentially some other options just by talking about them, but they won't be on the slides that people might be interested in. So the first one is the king of melee options, the go-to, as I've written here, which is Lord of Wolves. Lord of Wolves reaches heavy weapon total damage, pretty much, like really good heavy weapon total damage. I mean, you can see it compared to Acreus. Total damage is way higher, right? Like way, way, way higher, like 50% higher. And it's a special weapon, and the DPS is higher too, right? And you have to realize that almost every other, sorry, not almost, every other option here uses Tractor as a debuff. So this DPS number is actually going to be skewed towards these weapons here because they have a 30% debuff. But Lord of Wolves, I gave it a 15% debuff because I really think you should use Div with it on contest because it has a really punishing crit multiplier. So if you account for the fact that this has a weaker debuff and it's still outperforming like crazy in terms of total and DPS, Lord of Wolves plus Div is the go-to. Like, I honestly do not think swords are going to be relevant unless a boss has some weird sword scaler or something like that. Lord of Wolves Div is just insanely good. It's just insanely good for contests. On top of being a special weapon, really, really good. I mean, I'll talk about why I recommend it, in context even more toward the outro of this video. But just know that for melee bosses, I think Lord of Wolves Div is king for sure. Next up, we have swords. Swords vary in DPS depending on what sword frame you're using. In my opinion, this DPS variance is not really enough to highlight a specific archetype for DPS purposes over another one. However, you can see the total damage swings quite a bit, right? So you have 5.3 million, that's going to be stuff like adaptives and casters, and then 8.5 million, that's going to be your lightweight. It's kind of an easy pick here, right? I would say lightweights and aggressive frames are actually the best frames for contest on day one because they're the most consistent. They have no issue with stomping. They have no issue with piercing. They have no issue with sending the boss flying off the map like Lament does. I would say Gold Tusk and Crown Splitter if you have it, I guess. But for most people, it's going to be Gold Tusk because Throne Cleaver doesn't have Relentless as a craftable option. And lightweights technically do also have, I guess, better ammo economy and also higher total damage slightly than aggressives. So in my opinion, if you really want to use a sword on day one, like a legendary sword, either you're going to be using Surrounded Bequest because you can get surrounded, in instances like Crota, or you're going to be using Gold Tusk. I do think Gold Tusk with Relentless Whirlwind is extremely consistent. It's going to give you a lot of Transcendence. It's going to give you a lot of Bull Charge. It has excellent total damage, higher than Lord of Wolves, so maybe a reason to use it potentially. Now, you might be wondering, what about Ergo? What about Lament? Ergo I decided not to include because on day one, Ergo is only as good as Transcendence takes it, right? As it's only as good as far as Transcendence takes it. And if you run out of Transcendence, its DPS falls off a cliff. So Ergo might be competitive with Legendary Swords on day one, but I would recommend probably not using it, even if it's a special weapon, because I would just use Lord of Wolves Div at that point. But the main deal breaker is that you're going to run out of Transcendence on day one during damage, unless the damage phase is like 20 seconds. So you're going to run out of Transcendence, so I would not recommend using Ergo. And then Lament is like technically usable. It's like 132k DPS compared to like the 150k DPS here. So you're definitely losing DPS. But its total damage is like serviceable. And if you need healing, I guess, and you don't want to use like, I don't know, attrition orbs or something and an orb gen, then, you could use Lament instead. But I would say you should probably just use a legendary sword, given the changes to Lament and its nerf and, Pack Hunter given to legendary swords. Okay, next up we have Acreus. Pretty simple. Just look at the damage profile. There's no reason to use this over Lord of Wolves. It's lower total DPS. You have to do melee canceling and stuff, and it has even more annoying range than Lord of Wolves, right? Lord of Wolves is not a very high range weapon, but certainly higher range than Acreus. Next up we have Bastion. Again, no reason to use this over Lord of Wolves. I mean, it's fine as like a backup DPS option. Like 3.7 million total for a special is pretty good, but the DPS is absolutely pitiful compared to Lord of Wolves. And just use Lord of Wolves. Just use Lord of Wolves. Winter Bite. DPS, this DPS number, just ignore it because it's going to completely change next season. It only assumes that you have Banner of War from a teammate, by the way, right? So there's no well, there's no damage buff because that's going away next season. I didn't include any like Synthos or anything like that, right? So just 104k base, right, with Banner. Total damage, technically infinite. I will retest glaive damage next season, but just assume that scaling is going to shift completely drastically. I just wanted to include this here as a reference point. Okay, so now let's move on to some stuff that people might be wondering about, but I didn't put on the slides. So number one, regular shotguns, right? And I'm mostly talking about unvoiced here because a lot of people are, I think, overhyping unvoiced with redirection. for contest specifically, right? Redirection is inherently not a consistent perk for contest. If you die, you lose all your stacks. You have to use special ammo and expend special ammo on red bars in a non, I guess, explosive and quick manner, right? You kind of have to kill them one by one, which is potentially a bit awkward depending on the encounter, right? Total damage just not there. And DPS isn't really good enough without swapping, right? I mean, some people are making the argument that you want to do it on tractor. Like your tractor DPS is not going to be a difference maker on day one, right? So regular shotguns, legendary shotguns, regardless of what they are, whether they're unvoiced, whether they're something else, don't think they're worth using for DPS. Unless maybe you're on tractor, but even on tractor, you know, there's other options you could potentially look at. Okay. Heavy burst shotguns specifically are being buffed by I believe 10% next season. So it might be decent, right? But again, why overload of wolves, right? Why overload of wolves? The only person I could see maybe using the heavy burst is a tractor user, right? Tractor user, maybe you want to use like a 4th times precision instrument, arcane embrace or something. Or maybe a new heavy burst comes out next season, who knows, right? So that could be an option. Ergo, we already talked about this, transcendence duration issues, DPS not much higher. Barrow Dyad, some people were bringing this up for some reason. It's just worse than Outbreak. It's worse than Outbreak, even like really, if you have Peacekeepers, if you do the double swap thing, it's a little bit better than Outbreak, but way too much effort. Way too much effort. And it's only competitive on Titan. On non-Titan classes, it's terrible, right? So Barrow Dyad, I mean, it's fine, it's cool, but it's not very good for DPS. I would not recommend it on day one as a backup option. Just use Outbreak. Duality is getting buffed. On Black Wings is a 55% PvE buff at 3 stacks, so could potentially be useful. But again, why use it over Lord of Wolves, right? Why use it over Lord of Wolves? We'll have to see. And finally, Choir of One. Choir of One's great for ad clear, but it's just worse than Lord of Wolves for damage, right? So for damage, just swap them, right? Swap them. You can use Choir for ad clear and then swap to Lord of Wolves afterward. Okay. Next up, we have the another very wide and broad category when it comes to DPS, and that's going to be range DPS. So snipers, linears, machine guns, for when you don't want to get close or the boss doesn't want to get close to you. Okay, so there's the 5 big ones I want to go over here that I think are the most prominent are the Queenbreaker, which has a pretty solid damage profile, 5 million, DPS 141k. I would say it is the best in class DPS forward ranged option. And you might be thinking, well, Aegis, look at Whisper. It has higher DPS and it has higher total damage. In my opinion, Whisper is less consistent for day one because despite them having essentially an unnoticeably different damage profile from each other, Whisper, if you miss one crit, even if you have a div, let's say the div goes down or something happens and you miss, right? Horrible, right? Your total goes down, your DPS goes down, awful. Queenbreaker, you miss a crit, water under the bridge, whatever, right? I think Queenbreaker is easier to use, has a higher utility out of damage, and yeah, I think Queenbreaker is better. I think most people agree, right? So between the two, I would struggle to find a situation where Whisper would be more relevant than Queenbreaker. Okay. All right. Next up, we have Grand Overture. Grand Overture surprised me with its total damage. Now, its DPS is not amazing, but this DPS only assumes you have 10 preloaded missiles, and it also assumes that you don't have like Actium Warrig on or anything like that. So on Titan, the DPS on this thing is going to go up a lot because, not a lot, but it's going to go up a fair amount because I was literally like manually reloading the gun after shooting a volley. So I would literally do basically 2 reload animations, right? I would hone the volley and I would shoot it, and then I would reload, and then I would start shooting again, right? So a lot of reload downtime in this DPS calculation, and it's going to be definitely a little bit better if you're on Actium. But yeah, pretty easy to use, and the only issue with the Grand Overture is that if a boss is like moving around, the projectiles are a little bit slow, right? So could be potentially annoying, like I said, on flighty bosses. And the DPS here and the total damage is a bit skewed because a lot of the other options on this list, being precision weapons, use Div as a debuff. Whereas I chose Tractor for Grand Overture because Grand Overture doesn't need hit crits, right? But maybe you want to use Div with Grand Overture because like a boss's hitbox is like weird or something, right? You want to make it a big bubble instead of maybe a slender captain or something. Okay, next up we have Euphony. Euphony, I just picked here as like the best of the exotic specials in my opinion. Surprisingly decent mix of total and DPS for a special weapon. Similar profiles to Aggers and Still Hunt, which are like the other 2 special weapons that have similar damage profiles, but without the caveats because Aggers requires you not to use your super and Still Hunt requires you to be on Hunter with Nighthawk, right? And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is something that might surprise some people is Outbreak, right? So Euphony and Still Hunt and Aggers, if you look at their DPS and their total damage compared to the big guys like Queenbreaker, you're like, oh, that's not too bad, right? Pretty good backup DPS. And then you look slightly to the right and you realize Outbreak Perfected hits 110k DPS and Euphony hits 115k. And Stillhunt and Aggers are basically hovering around this 115, 120k mark. So you're telling me a primary hits 110k DPS with no caveats, and total damage is infinite, and next season we're getting super scaling changes, right? So kind of no reason to use Euphony, is there? Right? No reason to use Stillhunt, no reason to use Aggers. Just use Outbreak. Just use Outbreak, right? Just use Outbreak. Rest primary by far for 5-man scaling, like I wrote, and potentially interesting with super changes as well, because I'm sure everyone knows this, but Outbreak is great at farming supers, right? So potentially interesting. We'll see next season how that pans out. Okay. Before we move on, I'm going to talk about a couple more ranged options that are not on this list because there's a lot of ranged options in this game, and I can't fit them all in one slide. Number 1 is Darcy. Darcy has decent DPS, pretty bad total, but it's usable to provide network targeting to your teammates. However, even when you provide network targeting to teammates using stuff like Praetor's Revenge, snipers are still not outliers. They're still not outliers when it comes to damage, even when you add in Darcy. So in my opinion, investing 1 Darcy and then having a div and then having 4 people on, Anarchy Praetors or Finality Praetors or something like that, not really worth it on day 1. More setup, more annoying. There's simpler options. There's just simpler options out there. Sleeper Simulant, consistent but mediocre total damage. Div, if you have a div, you're not going to miss crits with Queenbreaker. Just use Queenbreaker. Maybe Sleeper's good with like Tractor or something on certain bosses, but I don't imagine that to be the case for most of the time. Leviathan's Breath needs testing. Probably still not worth using, even with Hierarchy, but I will test further, and I'll give you the results probably today or tomorrow. Regular Linears. Total damage is worse than Queenbreaker, even the Linears with 4 times the charm like Cataclysmic. And the DPS is worse even when you add Witherhoard and Area Denial, or Witherhoard and Trace or something like that with damage over time on top. Microcosm. Microcosm, surprisingly not very good. Almost identical DPS to Outbreak Perfected, which is a primary, while also requiring heavy ammo. Thunderlord. Thunderlord, better DPS than Outbreak for super generation if heavy is desired. So if you want to do like a super spam strategy, Thunderlord does have higher DPS than Outbreak by a fair margin, but you are using heavy ammo. And then finally, Finality's Augur and Anarchy plus Sniper. Respectable total damage, but DPS with network targeting added on still isn't that amazing. So in my opinion, maybe not. I was originally a big fan of Finality's Augur plus Praetor's Revenge. That's the first thing I tested with my day 1 team for damage. And it was fine, but it was execution-wise surprisingly not as consistent as I thought it would be. And it's also the damage-wise, it's just not that great, honestly. It didn't really amaze me, to be honest. Oh, sorry, I said finally, but there's one more. New Land Beyond. New Land Beyond has great total damage, right? Excellent total damage, like 7+ million total damage. And once it gets its catalyst where you can keep firing, probably similar DPS to Euphony. But again, if you're in this category, you may as well just use Outbreak, right? You may as well just use Outbreak. Okay, so that's it for ranged options. Let's move on and talk about splash options. So splash options, this category is a bit smaller, but it's going to be rockets, GLs, and other loose ends, big bosses, explosive damage. So I'm thinking bosses like Caretaker Riven, right? Where you have like really, really big hitbox and you're willing to just dump and maybe burst DPS or like, just dumping ammo is a priority, right? So we have aggressive rockets, which have the highest DPS so far, I believe, at 163k. But their total damage is really pitiful. They're really, really negatively affected by the reserve change. Hopefully we're wrong about the reserve change. Well, we know we're not wrong about the reserve change, but hopefully there's some sort of compensation for reserves, especially for weapons that suffer a lot when they don't have reserve mods. But I would say aggressive rockets, especially now compared to past day ones, are much more situational, because if you want just a brain dead spam option for a boss that's like close range and easy to hit, Lord of Wolves div is your thing, much higher total damage. I could see rockets maybe being used if damage checks are pretty tight, but unlikely. 1k, just, it's a splash option, so I wanted to include it here. It's pretty easy to use, and, total damage is like okay, I guess. It does have 78% fire team scaling, meaning that if you have 5 people using it, total damage goes down by 12% or minus 12%. But yeah, it's just something you should be aware of. I don't recommend 1k really, to be honest. I just put it here because it's like a splash exotic, and it's kind of relevant for damage, right? Rapid heavy GLs, DPS, not amazing, and total damage is also not amazing, pretty mediocre, but you'll notice that rapid heavy GLs still have higher total damage than aggressive rockets, despite the fact that the rockets had Pack Hunter as well. So yeah, rockets and heavy GLs, total damage, not looking too good. But I would say, at least with the heavy GLs, no reason to really use this over a rocket or other ranged options, because the DPS is just too low. Parasite Fusion. This is an interesting one. You know, this is just Parasite swapping with holsters and like a fusion. I just shoot a Parasite, swap to Fusion, 2 shots, swap to Parasite, and just repeat, right? This damage strategy assumed no stacks at the start on Parasite, so 0 stacks. I also did not get Worm byproduct, meaning I did not self-damage because that's probably not a good idea on day 1. But it's pretty easy to execute, right? Good synergy with Surge exotics, but the DPS is kind of mediocre. So, I mean, it's cool, it's quirky, but it's not amazing. And then finally, we have Galahorn Sniper. This is just a reference for damage, right? If you want to know how much a Gala user does compared to just shooting Envious like Hezen with 2 traces, by the way. So the aggressive rocket section here. This is 2 traces and an Envious bait, I believe, Hezen. So not like the most optimal or anything. If you used Izzy, the DPS would go up. But compared to G-Horn Sniper, that's how much damage you have compared to just like, you know, a supportive option. Okay. Next up, we have the Burst tab. This is like sub 5-second damage windows. Just a bunch of exotics here. Parasite, potentially good for Aatrox. Grand Overture, much more annoying to stack these days, but you know, more burst than Parasite, technically speaking. Oh, I should have included here. Maybe Edge Transit with Sticky Explosive or Regnant with Sticky Explosive. That's pretty high burst if you want a legendary option. So shout out Sticky Explosives. Aggressive rockets, you know, Hezen has pretty strong potential just because it's really, really easy to get like 3 rockets off compared to other options in the past. You can just do rocket, super, rocket, rocket, and your super reloads your rocket for free and overflows it, right? Or makes the max size doubled. So, you know, don't forget to include a Hezen in your burst potential options that you're weighing up. Merciless, I thought was pretty underwhelming when I used it, but could be used for a final stand, maybe when you have ads, but you know, it's still very niche, right? You want a boss to be basically in fusion range with like a Nezarec or something like that, and you need ads to be alive before final stand. But I only see Merciless maybe being used for final stand and not much else. And then finally, Fourth Horseman, maybe have it in your back pocket as a burst damage option, but I don't really imagine there's a situation where you want to use Fourth Horseman instead of Lord of Wolves, because Lord of Wolves has pretty high burst, not as high as Fourth Horseman, but high enough that by the time the Horseman mag is over and, you know, maybe there's still some time left in the damage window, Lord of Wolves will definitely make up the damage. Okay. Next, we have Debuff, which is our last section for the damage class discussion. Here we just have 4 tractor options, right? So if you're a tractor player and you want to know what legendary special you want to pick, these are your options, right? I would say Sniper is easily the best, but Tractor Sniper is a bit awkward because you have to be on a boss where you can go up the tractor safely, but also a boss where a sniper is relevant because you can hit crits consistently. So, and you're also going to be pretty close range, obviously, because you need to go and retractor, right? So Tractor Sniper, I don't know, 4 times a charm is OP, like I mentioned. On Praetus, it's really, really good. But especially, you know, you could pair with like an area denial or something, tractor, area denial, and then use 4 times Praetus with your like your super and stuff like that. But you know, there's not a lot of bosses where you can tractor and sniper, so you know, definitely very situational. I put fusion numbers here if you're curious. I think it was just with like, you know, scatter signal or something like that. Pretty chill, right? And you know, slice scatter signal exists, slice controlled burst. So if you want to like sever a boss for your teammates consistently, that's an option. And then finally, you have 2 shotguns, right? Rapids and aggressives. Aggressives have a little bit higher total, but are much more annoying to use in my opinion. So I would just go with Rapids. I thought the total damage difference would be a bit higher, but I would just go with Rapids. That's a perfect paradox there, by the way, with I believe Pugilist Trench and a little bit of manual reloading, but Cast No Shadows was able to cover for most of the reload time. And then finally, Divinity. Divinity is kind of a necessity for a lot of precision damage options. So, you know, you're taking it out of necessity, not for its DPS or anything like that. But if you're curious what the DPS looks like, that's what it looks like. 38k, about 1.7 million total. Okay. So, in summary, what should you be aware of for the upcoming DP race? Well, there's 4 things that I want to highlight. Number 1, if a boss is melee, just use Lord of Wolves div. Wow, shocker. I know. Use Lord of Wolves div. If you really want to use swords, I'd pick Gold Tusk. I know, weird recommendation, but to be honest with you, under stress, under like environments where you're getting stomped and piercing and blah 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 with swords, you want to pick something that's consistent, right? So that's going to be either a lightweight or an aggressive. Aggressives, you're picking lightweights kind of out of necessity here. I do think they are just better in general, but like you're kind of picking them out of necessity. And listen, lightweights are super simple. All you got to do is spam left click. Just spam left click, stare at the boss, smack, 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 smack. Easy, right? So there's that. But for the most part, just use Lord of Wolves div, right? For ranged options, Queenbreaker div. Queenbreaker div, maybe T-Lord div if, you know, super spam ends up being like really OP or something like that. But, you know, Queenbreaker div. Number 3, burst damage, supers plus Hezen. That's probably the best option, right? Just rocket, super, rocket, rocket. Boom. Imagine that on a day 1 on like a 5-second window. Super easy. And then finally, some testing stuff. Leviathan's Breath, I will test it. Super spam with T-Lord, I will test it. New Land Beyond Catalyst, I will test it. Grapple mailing, I will test it. And well conversion, I will test it today when it comes out. All right. So a little bit unprofessional from me. I am really exhausted, really, really tired recording this video. Hopefully this was of some use to you guys. I will also leave in the description a link to, on top of the graphing and the the summary tab that you guys are curious about. I will leave a Tableau. Now, warning for mobile users, got a flashbang you. This is a Tableau little graph that I made. It's like a little scatter plot. And you can see why certain weapons are outliers, right? So top right corner, so the x-axis is total damage and the y-axis is DPS. And you can see why Lord of Wolves is a huge outlier. And it's a special weapon too, by the way. And you can see, swords, lightweights and aggressives are off on the right here. Very, very high total damage. You can see, rapid machine gun, outbreak, New Land Beyond. Technically outbreak is infinite, but, I just kind of recorded for like 80 seconds, I think. And you got Whisper, you got Queenbreaker, you got Legend of Acarius, you got Overture, you got Aggressive Rockets. Basically, you can see here, like, everything that I mentioned that I think is, like, recommendable is in fact, the top right corner, right? So if you're curious what the actual numbers are, visually speaking, you got this. And then if you're curious about the actual, spreadsheet tab, you can see over here. Beautifully organized. This is one of my favorite damage projects, I think. One of my most useful damage projects. Really, really cool stuff. You can see bull charge increase here, right? Div is like 27%. Swords are going to be like 16%, right? Because their bull charge rate is insanely fast. Oh, I think I've color coded this wrong. Yeah, let me actually fix this. Sorry about that. It should be the other way around. So it should be, okay, I'll fix it later, whatever. But yeah, bull charge rate lower is better. Lower is better because this is actually the time between bull charges, right? So on swords with wolf packs, it's really, really low. It's like 2 seconds per bull charge, which is insane. And then some weapons basically have really, really slow bull charge, like Parasite Fusion. Makes sense, right? 7 seconds between bull charges, which is almost just Storm's Key passive charge. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Enjoy the new DLC. I will be posting DSC record today and VOG record tomorrow. And then we'll be off to our regularly scheduled programming. So goodbye for now. I love all of you. I really hope I can get some good sleep tonight. Bye-bye.